Now, for those that are like me, that really don't understand the microgut biome, it's kind of become like pop culture now to bring it up
Yeah.
because everybody's talking about it, but I still don't really understand how it's all. I've heard people say, "Oh, it affects your mental health. Oh, it affects, how much, like you said, how much energy you have, whether you're lethargic, whether you're cognitively aware." And I like trying to put it all together in my head, but I haven't like hit anything concrete. I know it's important, and I know that your food and everything that you're eating plays an effect in it. But can you give me like the rundown of, okay, this is what's really happening?
Right. Well, so
I know it's kind of like a big
it's a
topic to
big topic, but
try.
that's great. Yeah. So we all have bacteria and viruses and yeasts and even in some cases parasites that are sort of endemic to our system. And they, like I said, they have kind of like an equilibrium, like an ecology. It's sort of like a cultivated garden or a forest. You can imagine it sort of like a forest ecosystem that has lots of interrelationships and everybody's kind of doing their thing. And then um, they play a really important role in our immune system, for one, and also certain types of bacteria help produce certain types of vitamins and nutrients that our body needs. So, like we lack particular types of bacteria, we may be compromised in our ability to produce vitamin A, for example, or vitamin E, or like, certain nutrients. So, by way of their fermentation that they do with using plant fibers, basically, they can produce things that we need. Most of them most of them live in the large intestine. The small intestine is a little higher up. That's the area between, the outflow of your stomach and then all the way to your large intestine. And the small intestine's not supposed to have a lot of bacteria, but it sometimes ends up with bacteria. I don't know if you've heard of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
Mm.
That's sort of a gut condition that can really mess people up. So yeah, the bacteria basically, they help us manufacture needed nutrients. They help maintain our gut barrier function. They are immune players, and they can, they can be helpers, or if we have the wrong kind, they can be triggering inflammation and irritating the gut and creating, you know, allergies or allergic type reactions. Their byproducts, if we have bad bacteria, can cause a lot of symptoms and troubles. Like, just like any organisms, they make waste products just like we do. And their waste products can be inflammatory both for the gut, and once they get into the bloodstream, they can also cause problems there. So they just play a lot of really important roles in our immune system and digestion and our ability to absorb nutrients and break things down the right way. So
And so what you're eating feeds various types of that bacteria.
that is correct. Yeah. So on the one hand, yes, and we sometimes also eat fermented foods that provide, augmentation of those populations. It's what's interesting about it is that, like in terms of probiotics, like the probiotic foods that people eat, like sauerkraut, kefir, kombucha, like those kinds of things, and the supplements that most people take are usually a blend of the lactobacillus and bifidobacteria probiotics, and these are, they're like the most common types that we use, and they are super important for helping maintain the barrier function of the gut, but they don't really reside in the gut. Like we kind of need a slow kind of ongoing dose of them to kind of keep that going. Like when we take those probiotic supplements, they don't colonize in our gut. They actually come in, they kind of hang out for a little while, and then they leave. So if we're not taking more of those in, eventually we can kind of deplete our stores of them and
So should
have some
everyone
side
be
effects.
taking a probiotic?
Not necessarily, but traditional cultures usually have some kind of probiotic food that they
Mm-hmm.
eat. Then they usually eat just a small amount with every meal. So, like a little quarter-sized dollop of sauerkraut, or a little bit of yogurt, or a little bit of sourdough bread, or a little bit of fermented drink like kombucha or ale or whatever, like something fermented. It's like usually a small supplement to the diet. That's
And
kind
you're
of
just having it with each meal.
you have it with each meal, and it's just
Okay.
a good little dose of good stuff. Yeah.
I didn't know sourdough bread had probiotics.
Sourdough bread is fermented by a natural culture of bacteria and yeasts. Yeah.
And sourdough has the lowest gluten of any bread,
It
right?
does. It does.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, because theoretically, if it's been very well fermented, the gluten is mostly broken down by,
The process
by
of
the
making
process
it.
of fermentation that's happening in it.
And
Yeah.
does that affect the gut biome too? Is that why? Because so many people are allergic to gluten, it
Yes.
seems like now.
Yes. There are a couple of reasons for that. Like one is that like some people are what we would say, non-celiac, have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And this can often actually just be because of the type of starch, the type of carbohydrate, the fermentable carbohydrate that's in gluten is just making bacteria react. And this is like people who typically get bloated or gassy from eating gluten. That's sort of what we're looking at. But then there's also a lot of other problems with gluten, one of which is that, especially if it's not been organically grown, my understanding is that a lot of it is sprayed with
Chemicals.
with Roundup, the glyphosate, to speed up the process of just drying the grain after harvest, for example. And glyphosate itself is really, really hard on the digestive system. So, it's hard to say why this recent flare of people being sensitive to gluten, but I think that's part of it. And just, it's like the low quality of gluten and the chemicals involved. So there's that. And then even the healthiest, perfect wheat and gluten, just by itself, wheat tends to increase the secretion of this protein in the gut called zonulin, which can make little tiny gaps open up between the cells of your small intestine. And so you've heard, I'm sure, of leaky gut.
Yes.
And so for all of us, no matter whether we have celiac disease or we're totally healthy, gluten does this to some degree. It's kind of on a spectrum, the degree of the effect. But gluten, no matter who you are, has that effect to some degree. So if you eat a ton of it, I mean, some people it doesn't bother them or they don't have any noticeable side effects. So I wouldn't propose that everyone has to avoid gluten, but it is really commonly a problem for people, and we have to kind of keep an eye on that. So yeah.
So if you're trying to reset your gut microbiome and try to like eliminate these things, is there a certain way you should go about doing that?
In terms of diet or other
in terms
practices?
in terms of your diet. Because a lot of people eat breads and a lot of people eat pastas and legumes and stuff. Like, should you just cut that cold turkey if you're trying to wean that out?
I mean, I think if you don't have any symptoms
Issues,
or
don't mess with
problems,
it.
you shouldn't mess with things.
Okay.
Honestly, I feel like if you're healthy and you feel good and you don't have digestive symptoms, leave well enough alone, because
if it isn't broke, don't fix it.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it, for sure. Beyond that, if you are having symptoms and you're feeling like food might be part of it, the very simplest elimination diet is, like I was saying, just to cut out to cut out just the top 3, the gluten, dairy, and sugar, for 30 days. That's like a really basic way to go about this. And then after the end of that 30 days, you can one by one add things back in and just see how you react. If you react, then like, okay, I tried this gluten after I haven't had it for a month, and now I have a horrible stomach ache and I feel foggy headed. Like, that's a pretty clear signal that your body's not tolerating that well. So then you could leave that behind. But then, okay, then maybe you test a bowl of yogurt and the yogurt doesn't do anything. It's like, okay, great, I can keep eating yogurt. Right? You sort of test for these signs and signals from your body. And then, and if you have more complex things going on, it's important to kind of choose the right elimination diet. There's certainly the Whole30 is an option, which is sort of basically a paleo diet. There's something called the low FODMAP diet, which I use really commonly with IBS patients. Anybody with gut stuff, that's kind of the general place I start. It's low in fermentable carbohydrates. Ketogenic could be good if you're trying to lose weight and you're having the insulin sensitivity issues like we talked about. I don't know, there's like a million
There's a
options.
ton, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of times the way these diets are sold is like, oh, this one's the right one for everyone. And I don't believe that at all. I think it's important to kind of choose the right one. So if you have a lot of symptoms, you want to kind of choose one that's in the right ballpark for what kinds of symptoms or signs you're dealing with. And that's your approach. And then I generally find that including probiotics is an important piece of gut rehab for people.
Would you recommend like the pill supplement form or like just yogurt?
Yeah, the fermented foods typically don't have a therapeutic dose,
Okay.
really, of probiotics. So, and I usually recommend a triple probiotic protocol where you use a lactobacillus and bifido blend plus a Saccharomyces boulardii type, which is a beneficial yeast, and then a soil-based probiotic. And you sort of slowly work all these into your diet and, again, just like with the diet, you look to see what kind of positive benefit or impact you get. If you notice nothing at all, you can, say, forget it. I don't really need that. Or if you benefit, then you can, include them and then slowly back off of them to the point where you feel like, oh, I'm maintaining benefit, but I don't maybe need to use this super therapeutic dose in the long term, right?
And would that be like a daily supplement with that then?
Yeah, like,
Okay.
maximum, you're talking like 2 capsules a day, one in the morning, one in the evening for, you start, with approximately a month, and then reevaluate.
And
Like,
see what happens.
I'm a fan of like small scale trials, try something, evaluate the outcome, and then change gears after that and see.
Which is good. That's how it should be.
That's how it should be. Yeah.
Is dairy, since dairy is one of those top 3 you said to cut out, is that a problem for a lot of people?
It is a problem for a lot of people. There's kind of 2 reasons why it can be. One is just the simple lactose intolerance. Some people lack the enzyme to digest lactose, which is the sugar in dairy products. And that's pretty easily fixable with lactase enzymes. Like I think they're called Lactate is the little enzyme pills that you can take with dairy products. So that's the easy one to fix if that's the problem. And then some people are sensitive to the proteins in dairy, which can also mimic, like they're similar to the gluten proteins. So if you're sensitive also to gluten, sometimes there's a bigger problem there and it's a little harder. Like I can't seem to get it back in my diet other than like a little tiny bit of yogurt or like, I can eat butter, but yeah, some people can't add it back in.
Does that would whole, in terms of milk, would like whole milk be better? I've heard people say that, oh, I can't do dairy, but if it's like whole milk or not pasteurized, then it's like their body can handle it a little bit better.
Yeah, some people are able to tolerate unpasteurized milk, like raw milk, basically. Some people are able to tolerate, I don't know if you've seen the A2 milk in the grocery store. A2 is talking about the type of, there's types of protein in dairy products. So there's an A1 protein and A2 proteins, and they're kind of different depending on the breed of the dairy animals. And so like goats and certain cow varieties have more of the A2 protein versus like the Holsteins, like the standard black and white cows that we grow all over America.
That everybody thinks of for milk.
They have more of an A1 type milk. So some people tolerate the A2 better than the A1. And like they find if they're drinking just the A2 milk, they can tolerate it better. So now there's this new trend now where some of the dairies are selling A2 milk.
I didn't know that
separately.
was a thing.
It's a thing.
Do a lot of food allergies, that all stems from the gut microbiome?
Yes.
Or a portion.
Yes.
Because as a kid, I had a ton of food allergies, and I don't know if it's so much that I grew out of them as I got older, or I just started putting up with the symptoms, in a weird way. But yeah, like I couldn't do any dairy, I couldn't do gluten, I couldn't really do breads, I couldn't do a lot of different things. But now I eat them and I'm fine for the most. I mean, I'm walking around, I'm okay.
Yeah.
But is that common? Like, do most people grow? Is it like the peanut butter thing, right? Where, I don't know if you're familiar with that, or I've heard about peanuts and how if you introduce kids, the reason why there's so many kids with peanut allergies now is because they weren't introduced to them as kids. But if you introduce the population to peanuts and nuts as children, they'll have an allergic reaction, but they grow out of it and the reason that's why so many kids are allergic today is because they weren't introduced as kids because parents were freaking out about it. And now we have a huge increase in peanut allergy, specifically here in the U.S.
Yeah. I don't know if I buy that theory
Hmm.
of Genesis, but I do think allergists do have this theory of like low and slow increasing exposure to help people overcome allergies, and I think it's successful in some contexts. So it's I think it does work in some ways and contexts, but why are people getting more food allergies? I don't know. I mean, my personal thoughts, and I don't really have data to back this up or anything. It's just sort of a theory, but I mean, I think that our environment is more and progressively toxic. We're generally eating very poor, low quality foods, highly processed foods on the whole. Soda and cereal and bread and tortillas and crackers and chips and junk food. And then even, a lot of the stuff on the shelf at the grocery store that's supposed to be kind of healthy, like a can of soup, is full of garbage, like I wouldn't eat any of it. Like something like a can of Campbell's soup is full of a lot of what I consider toxic ingredients. So I think collectively our bodies are being exposed to a lot of like this whole food system that's full of chemicals and artificial ingredients and processed foods that are affecting our gut microbiome and our immune system. And then, the air we breathe is increasingly toxic. Our water is not very clean. The clothing we wear is treated with flame retardant. Our furniture is treated with just like there's all these exposures, and, not to make people paranoid. I don't want to, sound like, oh God, we can't go anywhere and nothing's safe. But I do think that collectively all of these things add up, and that over time, we're sort of like the frog in the slowly boiling water.
Yeah.
Right. And that these are signals about that. They're signs of this wider ecosystem effect in our culture and society. And I don't know.
The chemical thing freaks me out when I think about it for too long,
Mm-hmm.
because when you really start to look at, especially with plastics,
Mm-hmm.
and how
Yeah.
like there's just so many different factors that are leaching into the food, and like clothes, like you said, just leaching into our body that we
Mm-hmm.
really don't understand the
Yeah.
long-term ramifications for. We just know it's not good, but nobody seems to be alarmed enough to alter anything.
Yeah.
And I listened to a podcast a couple weeks ago with this doctor who was talking about all these phthalates that are leaching from these plastics and how they're shrinking taint sizes in the population, and how they're making people infertile and decreasing sperm counts and testosterone in both men and women. And it's crazy. It's like, why does nobody want to talk about this? And then you hear about like Monsanto products that are just being sprayed without regard across all of the food that you're eating. And it's like, what are the hormones being pumped into
Mm-hmm.
cows that are then slaughtered to beef them up, or probiotics or antibiotics or whatever everything that they're
Yeah.
sticking in. And it's like, that's what we're consuming.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like
crazy.
It's crazy, and it's so it's diffuse. So it's
That's the problem, right? Is it's not just one person doing it. It's
yeah.
across the board.
Yeah. I was reading this article last week just the other day about climate change, and it was kind of talking about this idea of like, it's here, it's right now. We're experiencing all these heat waves and freak storms and all these things. But, the week that the heat wave was going on in the Pacific Northwest, like what were we seeing in the news? We were seeing the news about this building collapse. It's like discrete and tangible. And it's something we can really grok. We can really get it because it's so physical. But these diffuse experiences of events far flung all over the planet happening simultaneously are only affecting, people in one city or this city over here, or, parents with children with food allergies. It's like a minority, even though it's like it's increasing. It's still a very small percentage of people. And so, why is nobody talking about it? Because it's difficult to get it.
Yeah.
right?
And how do you tackle a problem that's that widespread?
That widespread. And it's really, yeah, it's difficult to understand. And then not only to understand, but to problem solve it because it's so big and huge.